Shabbat Shalom. The title of this week's Torah portion, Baha'alotecha, is quite a mouthful to pronounce, and in reading and reviewing the portion, it has proven to be a lot to digest as well. Each chapter is seemingly disconnected from one another, sometimes causing whiplash with the abrupt transitions, and some chapters are more action-packed than others. There are plenty of exciting events in this portion that I could talk about, but being the language nerd that I am, I was drawn more to a familiar element of the writing in the Torah, the repetition. The Torah is full of repetition, and this portion is no exception. Why is the Torah so repetitive? What purpose does it serve, and how does it help people? We see this repetition right off the bat in the first chapter of this portion. It says, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you mount the lamps, let the 7 lamps give light at the front of the lampstand.' Aaron did so. He mounted the lamps at the front of the lampstand, as the Lord had commanded Moses." If I were an editor, I would advise the writer to consolidate this into a single, concise sentence, but for some reason it was thought that this needed the extra repetition of where exactly the lamps were positioned, and that this positioning was a direction from God to Moses. Later on in the portion, we see the same type of repetitive language. God tells Moses, "Let the Israelite people offer the Passover sacrifice at its set time. You shall offer it on the 14th day of this month, at twilight, at its set time." It then goes on to say, Moses instructed the Israelites to offer the Passover sacrifice, and they offered the Passover sacrifice in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight. Again, the Torah is really making sure we understand that the sacrifice was offered in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight. This is on top of the fact that we've already learned about the Passover sacrifice in great detail in previous portions. I'm not a seasoned scholar of biblical texts, but I have a feeling that these parts of the Torah were written this way for a reason. Why might it have been written this way? I have a few ideas based on my past and present careers. After college, I enrolled in the Academy for Urban School Leadership, or AUSL, a teacher training program in the Chicago Public Schools. After a year of student teaching and concurrent graduate school, I taught first grade for a year, realized teaching wasn't for me, and retired early. However, I learned a lot in my brief teaching career. One of the most important things I learned was the value of repetition, especially when it comes to small children. One of the first strategies we were taught was providing explicit directions and having students repeat things back to you to check for understanding. For example, when I ring this bell, stand up, push in your chair, and walk quietly to the rug. That's 3 things you're going to do when I ring the bell. Stand up, push in your chair, and walk quietly to the rug. Who can tell me what you're going to do when I ring the bell? At which point I would call on a student, or sometimes 2 or 3 in succession, to repeat the instructions back to me. It sounds excessive, and definitely felt that way at the time, but the idea was that repeating these things over and over would eventually make the instructions stick in the kids' minds and reduce all potential for confusion. So in the Torah, maybe if we're told several times where Aaron was instructed to position the lamps, it will be drilled into our brains and will not only remember, but obey the command too. Repetition is also an important element in my current field of work, oncology research. I work with doctors, nurses, statisticians, and numerous other team members to coordinate the development of research protocols, which are cohesive governing documents for clinical trials. You could think of it as a rule book for how to conduct a particular trial. Since there are several safety elements to keep in mind when conducting these trials, especially those involving new investigational drugs, it is not uncommon to list critical instructions in several different places within the document. For example, one page might say, "Conduct liver function blood tests on days 1, 8, and 15 of each month on treatment." Another page might say, "Since this drug might cause liver toxicities, liver function blood tests are required on days 1, 8, and 15 of each month on treatment." There is often also a nice clear calendar of required tests that includes those same instructions. In this case, it's not that people don't understand what they read the first time, it's that they might miss it, and another opportunity to encounter the information will help ensure that they see it, and for safety's sake, we definitely want them to see it. Perhaps this was the intention of the instructions for when to make the Passover sacrifice. Maybe if it's mentioned more than once, people will be less likely to do it on the wrong day of the wrong month at the wrong time of day, thus avoiding any potential consequences, like being cut off from their kin or bearing guilt. So maybe the Torah was onto something with all this repetition. While the writing may sound clunky and awkward to our modern ears, it ensures that people understand, remember, and do things how they are supposed to be done, leaving little room for error. It also benefits the giver of the instructions, in that even if the instructions are not followed correctly, it cannot be blamed on lack of clarity. Perhaps the repetition in the Torah was the biblical equivalent of the bolding and underlining we use for emphasis in writing today. If so, it certainly served its purpose. Thank you to Rabbi Minkus for the opportunity to think about and dissect this Torah portion, and to my study buddies, Joe and Miriam, for the excellent insight and discussion. I had a great time working with all of you, and I definitely learned a lot. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should probably go read the portion a few more times so I don't forget anything. Shabbat Shalom.